Just a housewife? That's cute. I suppose someone needs to stay home and dust the trophies. My father-in-law Richard's voice cut through the holiday dinner chatter, his words landing like ice water down my spine. The table fell quiet for just a moment, that terrible pause where everyone waits to see if you'll challenge the family patriarch or swallow the insult with your mashed potatoes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I did what I'd done for 7 years of marriage to his son. I smiled tightly and reached for my wine glass, letting the moment pass while conversation resumed around me. But something was different this time. Perhaps it was the way my mother-in-law, Patricia, nodded in agreement, or how my husband Daniel studied his plate instead of meeting my eyes. Or perhaps it was because earlier that morning, I'd received an email confirming my ownership of the very roof over their heads. My name is Jennifer Wheeler, and until 3 years ago, I was exactly what my in-laws thought. A college-educated woman who'd chosen to support my husband's career instead of pursuing my own. I'd left a promising position at an investment firm when Daniel received a promotion requiring frequent travel. We agreed one of us should be present for our children, and since his income far outpaced mine at the time, the decision seemed logical. What my in-laws never bothered to ask, what my own husband had begun to forget, was that before becoming just a housewife, I'd graduated top of my class in finance and had managed a portfolio that consistently outperformed the market. The skills that had made me an asset professionally didn't vanish when I started managing our home instead of client accounts. They simply found new applications. The pivot point in my story came during a routine lunch with my former boss, Meredith. I'd maintained these quarterly catch-ups, partly to keep a foot in the professional world, and partly because her friendship mattered to me. We were midway through our salads when she mentioned a unique investment opportunity. It's a bundle of undervalued mortgages in Westview Heights, she explained, napkin dabbing the corner of her mouth. The bank wants them off their books quickly after that merger. They're selling at 70 cents on the dollar. I paused, fork midair. Westview Heights? That's where Daniel's parents live. Meredith nodded. It's a goldmine neighborhood. For this kind of investment, solid properties, owners who can afford their payments but are underwater after the housing crisis. Low risk, guaranteed returns. My mind whirred with possibilities. I knew Daniel's parents had refinanced during the market peak, taking equity out to fund Richard's boat purchase and Patricia's kitchen renovation. When property values plummeted, they found themselves owing more than their home was worth. How much would someone need to buy in? I asked, trying to sound casual. For a single mortgage? About $300,000 minimum. Why, do you have that kind of cash lying around? She laughed, then noticed my expression. Wait, are you serious? I was. What Meredith didn't know, what nobody knew except my financial advisor, was that my grandmother had left me a substantial inheritance when she passed away 5 years earlier. Instead of merging it with our family finances, I'd kept it separate, quietly growing it through careful investments. Daniel was aware of the inheritance but not its extent, and we'd agreed it would be my independence fund, though I doubt he understood how seriously I took that designation. 3 weeks after that lunch, I became the owner of 5 mortgages in Westview Heights. One of them belonged to Richard and Patricia Wheeler. I didn't set out to become my in-laws' creditor out of spite. It was genuinely a sound investment, offering better returns than my other holdings. But I won't deny feeling a certain satisfaction, knowing that the monthly payment Richard made, the one he frequently complained about at family gatherings, was going partially into my account. For months, nothing changed. I attended family dinners, minded my children, maintained our home, and quietly managed my growing portfolio. The mortgage servicing company handled all communications with the homeowners, so Richard and Patricia had no idea who actually held their debt. I told no one, not even Daniel. It wasn't about creating a dramatic revelation. It was about maintaining the private sense of empowerment that came with knowing. Until that Thanksgiving dinner, when Richard decided to hold court on the value of real work. The evening had begun pleasantly enough. I'd spent 2 days preparing a traditional feast, turkey with all the trimmings, homemade rolls, 3 different pies. The dining room in our suburban home gleamed with polished silver and crystal, the table setting worthy of a magazine spread. Our children, Emma, 10, and Jack, 7, were on their best behavior, dressed in holiday outfits I'd carefully selected. Daniel's sister Rebecca and her husband Tom arrived first, their teenage twins immediately disappearing upstairs with our kids. Rebecca brought wine and compliments, admiring the decorations and meal preparation, while Tom and Daniel retreated to the living room to discuss sports and politics. When Richard and Patricia arrived, they performed their usual routine, Patricia inspecting everything with thinly veiled criticism. "Oh, you're using these napkins for a holiday?" While Richard made a beeline for Daniel's whiskey collection, without so much as a hello. Dinner conversation flowed predictably. Richard dominated, sharing strongly worded opinions on everything from politics to the neighbor's new fence. Patricia added occasional commentary, mostly about people from church whose children were becoming doctors or executives. Rebecca tried valiantly to steer toward neutral topics, while Tom nodded along to whatever was said. Daniel, as usual, transformed into a more assertive, almost unrecognizable version of himself around his father, eager for approval. I served and cleared and smiled, playing my assigned role while mentally calculating investment returns. The turning point came when Jack innocently mentioned that his friend's mother had just been made partner at her law firm. "That's wonderful," I replied, passing the cranberry sauce. "Mrs. Rodriguez worked very hard for that promotion." Richard snorted. "Those poor kids, probably raised by nannies while mom plays career woman." I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my expression neutral. "Actually, her husband works from home. They've found a balance that works for their family." Patricia chimed in, her voice sweet with condescension. "Well, not everyone is cut out for the challenges of full-time motherhood. Some women need the validation of an office title." I caught Daniel's eye, silently urging him to say something. He gave me a small shrug that said, "You know how they are. Don't make waves." "Speaking of careers," Richard continued, swirling his whiskey, "Daniel's closing that Peterson acquisition next week. Another feather in his cap." He turned to me with what passed for generosity in his mind. "And of course, he couldn't do it without you keeping the home fires burning, Jennifer." I nodded, accepting the backhanded compliment. "We're a team." Richard chuckled. "Team, that's cute. But let's be honest, there's a reason Daniel's the breadwinner. Some people are built for the business world, and some are better suited for domestic duties." The table tensed. Even Patricia seemed to recognize he'd gone too far. "Dad?" Daniel began half-heartedly. Richard waved him off. "I'm not saying anything Jennifer doesn't know. There's no shame in being just a housewife. Someone has to raise the kids and plan the dinner parties that help Daniel network." Just a housewife. The phrase hung in the air like a slap. That's when something shifted inside me. 3 years of managing my own successful investments while being treated like a glorified housekeeper by my in-laws, sometimes even by my husband, crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. "Actually, Richard," I said, my voice steady, "I've been meaning to talk to you about your mortgage." The table went silent. Daniel looked confused, while Richard's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "My mortgage? What about it?" His tone suggested I'd drastically overstepped some boundary. "Interest rates have dropped significantly since you refinanced. You're paying nearly 2% above current market rates." I took a sip of water, heart pounding but voice steady. "On a $450,000 balance, that's quite a lot of money wasted each month." Patricia's eyes narrowed. Jennifer, that's hardly appropriate dinner conversation. Our finances are private. Normally, I'd agree completely, I replied with a smile. But in this case, I have a vested interest in your financial decisions. Daniel was staring at me now. Jen, what are you talking about? I placed my napkin beside my plate and folded my hands on the table. 3 years ago, I purchased a bundle of mortgages as an investment opportunity. One of them happened to be your parents' home. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children, sensing the tension, stopped their chatter from the other room. Richard recovered first, his face flushing deep red. That's ridiculous. Our mortgage is with Westview Community Bank. They service the loan, I corrected gently. But I own the debt. Have for quite some time now, along with 4 other properties in your neighborhood that have provided an excellent return on investment. Daniel found his voice. You never told me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You never asked, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. Just like you never ask about any of my investment decisions. Just like your parents never asked what I did before becoming just a housewife. Patricia's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. This is some kind of joke. It's not, I assured her. And to be clear, I didn't purchase your mortgage to create this moment. It was simply a sound financial decision that's yielded a 16% return so far. I turned back to Richard. But since we're discussing real work and who's capable of what, I thought you should know that your monthly payment, the one you complained about at Easter dinner, goes into an account I manage, along with the returns from my other investments. Richard's face had progressed from red to an alarming purple. Daniel, he sputtered, did you know about this? My husband looked shell-shocked. No, Dad, I didn't. I felt a pang of guilt at that, not for my investments, but for the public nature of this revelation. Daniel and I would have words later, but for now, I needed to finish what I'd started. I don't expect this revelation to suddenly change how you view me, Richard, but perhaps next time you feel inclined to dismiss someone as just anything, you might consider that people contain depths you haven't bothered to explore. Rebecca, bless her, broke the excruciating silence that followed. Well, these mashed potatoes are incredible, Jen. Did you add something different this year? The remainder of dinner passed in strained conversation. Richard barely spoke, while Patricia made a visible effort to appear unbothered. Daniel kept shooting me questioning glances that I answered with reassuring smiles. This wasn't about undermining him or creating family drama. It was about reclaiming the respect I'd gradually surrendered. After dessert, Richard and Patricia made an unusually early exit, citing a non-specific morning commitment. As they gathered their coats, Richard approached me with Patricia hovering nervously at his side. I'd like to discuss this mortgage situation privately, he said, voice forcibly controlled. Perhaps you could come by our house tomorrow. His wording wasn't lost on me. Not an apology, not even an acknowledgement of his condescension, but a businesslike request for a meeting on his territory. I have a full day tomorrow, I replied, but I'm free Tuesday afternoon. We could meet at Westview Community Bank if you'd like to discuss refinancing options. I've been meaning to introduce myself to the branch manager anyway. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Fine, Tuesday at 2. After they left, Daniel helped me clear the table while Rebecca, Tom, and the children watched a holiday movie in the living room. We worked in silence until the dishwasher was loaded. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, leaning against the counter. I wiped down the granite island, organizing my thoughts. At first, it was just a good investment opportunity. Then, as your parents continued to treat me like some sort of domestic servant despite knowing my background, it became, I don't know, a private reassurance that I was more than they assumed. But why keep it from me? I looked at him directly. Because over time, you started seeing me the same way they do. When was the last time you asked about my investments? Or acknowledged that running our household is actual work, not some extended vacation from real responsibility? His expression shifted from hurt to something more contemplative. I didn't realize. I know you didn't. And that's part of the problem. I put down the dish towel and took his hands in mine. Daniel, I love our family and the life we've built. I don't regret the choices we made about our careers, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that I'm still the same person who graduated, with honors in finance, who helped you prepare for interviews, who advised on your first major business proposals. He had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. I've taken you for granted. He squeezed my hands. But the mortgage thing, that's going to be a nuclear bomb in my relationship with my parents. Only if they make it one, I said. All I did was make a legal investment. If they're angry that I didn't tell them, they might consider why I felt I couldn't. Why I knew they wouldn't see it as a sign of financial acumen, but as some sort of power play. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. You know my dad. He's going to see it exactly that way. Then that's his problem to work through. I'm not going to keep diminishing myself to protect his ego. Our conversation was interrupted by the children clamoring for pie seconds, but something had shifted between us. Daniel looked at me differently for the rest of the evening. Not with anger as I'd feared, but with a renewed awareness, as if seeing clearly someone who had been standing in plain sight all along. Tuesday arrived with a mixture of dread and determination. I dressed carefully in a sleek charcoal pantsuit I'd purchased for professional lunches with Meredith, not my usual mom wardrobe of well-cut jeans and cashmere sweaters. My appearance was a conscious choice, armor for the confrontation ahead. Daniel had offered to come with me, but I declined. This was my battle to fight, my narrative to reclaim. The bank's interior was all polished wood and muted luxury, designed to convey stability and discretion. Richard and Patricia were already seated in the waiting area, both overdressed for the occasion in what I recognized as their important meeting attire. Patricia clutched her designer handbag like a shield, while Richard checked his watch repeatedly. Jennifer, he acknowledged stiffly when I approached. Patricia offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thanks for meeting me, I said, extending professional courtesy despite the personal nature of our gathering. The bank manager, Mr. Collins, welcomed us into his office, where I'd arranged for a mortgage specialist to join us. I'd called ahead to prepare them for this unusual meeting between mortgage holder and borrowers. Mrs. Wheeler has explained your situation, Mr. Collins began, and we've prepared some options for refinancing that could significantly reduce your monthly payments. Richard cleared his throat. Before we discuss that, I'd like to address the unusual circumstances. I find it highly inappropriate that my daughter-in-law purchased our mortgage without informing us. I met his gaze steadily. There was no legal requirement to do so. The transaction was handled through proper channels, with all appropriate privacy protections. It's not about legality, Patricia interjected. It's about family boundaries. I understand how you might feel that way, I acknowledged. But I'd like to separate the personal aspects from the financial opportunity here. Regardless of who holds your mortgage, these refinancing terms could save you over $600 monthly. Richard's expression remained stony. And I suppose you'd lose money on that arrangement. Actually, no. The fee for refinancing would offset any reduction in interest income. This would genuinely benefit everyone involved. The mortgage specialist walked through the numbers, demonstrating the potential savings. Despite themselves, I could see Richard and Patricia's interest growing as the presentation continued. When the banker finished, Richard leaned forward. And what exactly do you want in exchange for this? Generosity? The question revealed everything about how he viewed the world, as transactions where kindness always came with hidden costs. Nothing, I replied simply. This isn't about leverage or payback. It's about making a sound financial decision, which is something I'm actually quite skilled at. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer, we may have underestimated your capabilities. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. Richard struggled visibly, pride warring with pragmatism. Finally, economic sense won out. We'll need to review the paperwork carefully. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. As we prepared to leave, Richard paused at the door. I still don't understand why you never mentioned your financial activities. I considered deflecting but decided honesty was the only path forward. Because you never showed interest in who I was beyond my role as Daniel's wife and your grandchildren's mother. You decided years ago that I was just a housewife, and it was easier to let you believe that than to constantly defend my worth. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of it. The following Sunday, dinner was markedly different. Richard asked about my investment strategy. Patricia inquired whether I might advise on her friend's retirement planning. Small steps, awkward and uncertain, but movement nonetheless. Daniel, too, had changed. He began consulting me on business decisions again, not just household matters. We started having weekly finance dates where we reviewed our investments together, rekindling the partnership that had gradually faded. I won't pretend one revelation transformed everything overnight. Richard still occasionally makes dismissive comments about women's work. Patricia still subtly criticizes my parenting. Choices. Old habits die hard, and respect once lost takes time to rebuild. But something fundamental has shifted. I no longer shrink myself to fit others' limited perception. I navigate family gatherings not as just anything, but as the complete, complex person I've always been. The mortgage that caused such upheaval? Richard and Patricia refinanced, saving considerably on monthly payments. I reinvested those funds in a promising startup founded by a former stay-at-home mother. It's already yielded impressive returns. Some might say I was wrong to keep my financial activities secret for so long, that marriages should be transparent. Perhaps that's true in an ideal world, but in the real world, sometimes women create private spaces of power when public recognition is denied them. Sometimes we build our worth quietly until we're strong enough to demand its acknowledgement. I don't regret the path I took, neither becoming just a housewife, nor secretly becoming my in-laws' creditor. Both choices were mine, made with clear eyes and full awareness of their implications. The only regret I had was allowing others to define my value based on roles rather than capabilities. These days, when Richard introduces me at his country club events, he mentions my financial acumen alongside my children's achievements. It's not full equality, but it's progress, hard-won and imperfect, like most victories worth fighting for. As for Daniel and me, we're building something new from the foundation of what was nearly lost. A partnership based on mutual respect and recognition of each other's full humanity. Some nights, after the children are asleep, we sit on the back porch with glasses of wine and talk about our dreams, his for his career, mine for my growing investment portfolio, ours for our family's future. And sometimes, I think about that Thanksgiving dinner and smile, remembering the look on Richard's face when he realized just a housewife owned the roof over his head. Not because I enjoy his discomfort, but because that moment marked the beginning of my reclamation, of respect, of recognition, and most importantly, of myself. The days following that Thanksgiving dinner unfolded in a blur of tense phone calls and uncomfortable silences. Daniel spent hours on the phone with his parents, each evening, their voices carrying through our bedroom door despite his attempts to speak quietly. I caught fragments, completely blindsided. Your responsibility to tell us. And the recurring theme, how could she? I busied myself with the children, with holiday decorations, with anything that would occupy my hands while my mind raced through possible outcomes. Had I made a catastrophic error? Would this revelation permanently fracture our family? The question that kept me awake at night? Was proving my worth the cost? On the third evening after Thanksgiving, I found Daniel sitting alone in our darkened kitchen, nursing a glass of bourbon. "They want to sell the house," he said without preamble. "They'd rather take a loss than have you as their creditor." Something cold settled in my stomach. That would be financially devastating for them. I know. He took another sip. Dad's not thinking rationally. He feels violated. The word choice wasn't lost on me. Violated? By a legitimate business transaction? By family becoming business. Daniel set his glass down carefully. "He says it's like finding out your doctor is secretly recording your appointments, or your therapist is writing a book about you. That's not remotely the same thing." I know that, but this isn't about logic for him. It's about pride. I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. And what about my pride, Daniel? What about the constant dismissal I've endured? The way you gradually reduced me to a function rather than a person with skills and ambitions? He had the grace to look ashamed. "I've been trying to see this from your perspective. I really have. But my parents are threatening to cut us off completely, not just financially, which doesn't matter, but from the family. No holidays, no relationship with the grandchildren. They're saying you abused privileged information. That's absurd. Their mortgage was a matter of public record. Anyone could have purchased it. But not anyone did. You did." His voice held no accusation, just tired recognition of the complicated reality we now faced. Sleep eluded me that night. Around 3 a.m, I slipped from bed and went to my home office, a space that had gradually transformed from a dedicated work area to a multi-purpose room cluttered with craft supplies, outgrown children's clothes destined for donation, and holiday decorations. I cleared a space at the desk and opened my laptop. The investment account showed the details of the mortgage bundle, the steady payments, the accumulated interest. Black and white numbers representing what had become an emotional powder keg. With a few keystrokes, I could transfer ownership, sell the debt to another investor, wash my hands of the whole situation, and perhaps salvage family peace. But something stopped me. The same determination that had carried me through business school as one of few women in my program. The resolve that had helped me build a promising career before I chose to pause it for family. The dignity that had silently endured years of diminishment at family gatherings. Walking away would be easier. It would smooth things over, allow everyone to pretend my revelation never happened, return us to the comfortable dynamic where Richard held court, Patricia judged, and I served pie with a pleasant smile. But it would also erase the fundamental truth I'd finally spoken aloud. I was more than they had allowed themselves to see. Dawn found me still at the desk, a plan forming. Not surrender, not escalation, but a third path. I waited until a reasonable hour before making the call. "Meredith, it's Jennifer Wheeler. I need your advice on something complicated." My former boss listened without interruption as I explained the situation, the mortgage purchase, the Thanksgiving revelation, the family fallout. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Well, you certainly don't do things halfway, do you?" It wasn't planned as a dramatic gesture. It just happened. Things don't just happen in finance, Jen. You made a series of deliberate choices that led here. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. The question is, what do you want to happen next? I took a deep breath. I want to leverage this situation into something productive, not just for me, but for everyone involved. Including your in-laws? Especially them. I surprised myself with the realization, they're family. Despite everything, I don't want to hurt them. Meredith was quiet for a moment. You know, most people in your position would either back down completely or double down on the power. Play. The fact that you're looking for a third option tells me you haven't completely lost your negotiation skills. By the time Daniel came downstairs with the children, I'd drafted a proposal. Over breakfast, I asked if he could arrange a meeting with his parents. Neutral territory, no children present, just the four of us. "They're not interested in talking," he said, helping Emma pour cereal. Dad was pretty clear about that. "Tell them I'm prepared to sell them the mortgage at a significant discount. Below market value." I stirred my coffee calmly. "But I'd like to discuss terms in person." His head snapped up. "You'd do that?" "I would, with conditions." Daniel studied me for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "I'll try. No promises." He called from work later that day. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at a local restaurant, public enough to discourage outbursts, private enough for a real conversation. The intervening days passed in a strange limbo. I continued routine tasks, helping with homework, planning meals, managing the household, with part of my mind constantly gaming out scenarios for the upcoming meeting. What if they refused my offer? What if this became the breaking point in my marriage? What if I was sacrificing my children's relationship with their grandparents for my own pride? Saturday arrived cold and clear. I dressed with careful consideration. Professional, but not intimidating, a balance between the corporate identity I'd once inhabited and the mother and wife I'd become. Daniel was unusually attentive that morning, making breakfast for the children, arranging for our neighbor to watch them during our meeting. "Whatever happens," he said as we drove to the restaurant, "I want you to know I'm trying to understand your perspective. I may not have fully succeeded yet, but I'm trying." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you. That matters more than you know." Richard and Patricia were already seated when we arrived, their postures rigid, with barely contained tension. Patricia had aged a decade in a week, her usual meticulous appearance now showing signs of strain. Richard's face was carefully neutral, the practiced expression of a man accustomed to high-stakes business dealings. Greetings were stiffly exchanged, orders placed with forced politeness. Only after the waiter departed did Richard speak directly, to me. "Daniel says you have a proposal." I nodded, removing a folder from my bag. "I do. But before I share it, I'd like to clarify something. My purchase of your mortgage was not intended as a hostile act. It was part of a larger investment strategy that happened to include your property." "Convenient," Patricia murmured. "It's the truth," I continued steadily. "I didn't reveal my ownership because I knew exactly how you'd interpret it. Not as a business decision, but as some sort of inappropriate overreach." "Which it was," Richard cut in. "Family and business don't mix." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? You helped Daniel secure his first job through your golf club connections? You invested in Rebecca's husband's startup. You regularly advise both your children on major purchases and investments. It seems family and business mix quite frequently in this family, just not when it involves me." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Patricia glanced at her husband, whose jaw had tightened. "That's different," Richard said finally. "Why? Because you were the one with expertise and authority in those scenarios?" I kept my voice gentle, genuinely curious rather than confrontational. "Would you have reacted differently if Daniel had purchased your mortgage as an investment?" The question hung in the air between us. Richard opened his mouth, closed it. Again. "Robert," Patricia touched her husband's arm, "perhaps we should listen to Jennifer's proposal." He nodded curtly. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "I'm prepared to sell you the mortgage directly at 80% of its current market value. This would allow you to refinance at a much better rate than you currently have, saving approximately $830 monthly." I passed over a second sheet. "These are the terms. As you can see, they're quite favorable. Richard skimmed the document, his expression giving nothing away. And what do you want in exchange, besides the money? This was the moment I'd rehearsed most carefully. 2 things. First, I'd like to establish a college fund for Emma and Jack, using a portion of the proceeds from this sale. You'd have joint control over the accounts with me, not Daniel, not your financial advisor. You and me, making decisions together about our family's future. Patricia blinked, clearly caught off guard by the suggestion. And the second thing? I'd like to be treated as a full member of this family, with all the respect that entails, not as an extension of Daniel, not as a caretaker for your grandchildren, but as Jennifer Wheeler, a person with her own mind, skills, and value. Richard's eyes narrowed. That's not exactly quantifiable. Neither is family, but we still know when it's working and when it isn't. I held his gaze. In practical terms, it means no more dismissive comments about my choices. No more just a housewife remarks. No more conversations that deliberately exclude me when they touch on business or finance or anything beyond recipes and childcare. Daniel reached for my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support that nearly broke my composure. That's all? Richard sounded suspicious, as if waiting for the real demand to emerge. That's all, I confirmed. Financial benefit for everyone involved, educational security for your grandchildren, and basic respect. I think it's a reasonable offer. Patricia looked at her husband. Something unspoken passed between them. 40 years of marriage distilled into a glance. We'll need to review this with our financial advisor, Richard said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. I gathered my papers. But the offer expires in 2 weeks. After that, I'll need to pursue other options. The subtle power shift wasn't lost on anyone at the table. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I was setting the terms of engagement with my in-laws. We finished our meal in awkward conversation, neutral topics like the children's school activities and an upcoming community event. As we prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside while Daniel settled the bill and Richard waited by the door. This isn't easy for him, she said, nodding toward her husband. His generation, his upbringing, it shaped how he sees things. I understand. That, I replied. But understanding doesn't mean accepting treatment that diminishes me. Your husband is capable of growth. So am I. So are all of us. She studied me with new eyes. You've changed. No, I corrected gently. I've just stopped hiding parts of myself to make others comfortable. The drive home was quiet, both Daniel and I processing the meeting in our own ways. Finally, as we turned onto our street, he broke the silence. The college fund was a smart touch. It wasn't a tactical decision. I genuinely want them involved in the children's future. Despite everything, their family. He nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what you said, about being treated as a full member of the family. Have I really been that blind to how they treat you? The question deserved honesty. Yes and no. You notice the obvious slights, but you've grown so accustomed to the subtle ones that they've become invisible. The way your father automatically directs financial questions to you, even when they're about household matters I manage. The way your mother praises your career achievements but describes my pre-children work as that job you used to have. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have seen it sooner. We both adapted to patterns that were easier not to challenge. I reached for his hand, but I can't do that anymore. Not if I want our children, especially Emma, to grow up understanding their full value isn't contingent on the roles they play for others. That evening, after the children were asleep, I sat at my desk reviewing the mortgage documents, ensuring everything was in order should Richard and Patricia accept my offer. A text message from Daniel's sister Rebecca lit up my phone. Dad called. What did you do? He actually used the word respect in reference to you. I think the apocalypse is nigh. I smiled, allowing myself a moment of cautious optimism. Change. Wouldn't happen overnight, but perhaps we'd taken the first tentative steps towards something better. The following week brought unexpected developments. Rather than waiting the full 2 weeks I'd offered, Richard contacted us after just 4 days. He requested another meeting, this time at their home, with their financial advisor present virtually. Is that a good sign or a bad one? I asked Daniel as we drove to Westview Heights. With my father? Impossible to tell. He glanced at me. Are you nervous? A little, I admitted, but also resolute. The house I technically owned a stake in was exactly as I remembered from countless family gatherings, meticulously maintained, traditionally decorated, every surface displaying evidence of Patricia's careful homemaking and Richard's professional success. Family photos lined the hallway, chronicling the growth of their children and grandchildren. I noticed for the first time how few of them included me, despite my decade in the family. Richard's home office was a masculine space of leather and dark wood, intimidating by design. The laptop on his desk displayed his financial advisor, Martin, a silver-haired man I'd met at previous family functions. Patricia served coffee with mechanical politeness before taking a seat beside her husband. We've reviewed your proposal, Richard began without preamble. Martin has some thoughts. The advisor cleared his throat. Mrs. Wheeler, the terms you've offered are indeed favorable for your in-laws. From a purely financial perspective, I've advised them to accept. However, Richard interjected, we have some concerns about the non-financial aspects. I took a careful sip of coffee. The college fund? No, that part is acceptable. Generous, even. He seemed to struggle with the admission. It's the other condition, about respect and treatment, and so forth. It feels like you're asking us to perform for financial consideration. The characterization stung. That's not my intention at all. I'm not asking for performance or insincerity. I'm asking for a reset of our family dynamic. Patricia leaned forward. Jennifer, you have to understand how this looks from our perspective. We've always treated you as family. As a particular kind of family member, I clarified. One who serves, supports, and stays in her lane. I'm asking to be seen and engaged with as a whole person. Martin, the advisor, looked uncomfortable, witnessing such a personal discussion. Perhaps I should drop off while you discuss these matters? No, stay, Richard said. This involves the financial arrangement, which is your domain. He turned back to me. Jennifer, I've been thinking a lot about our Thanksgiving conversation and this whole situation. I won't pretend I wasn't angry. I still am, to some extent. But I've also been forced to consider why you felt compelled to keep your financial activities secret from us. The admission surprised me. And what conclusions have you reached? Richard exchanged glances with Patricia. That perhaps, and this isn't easy for me to say, we haven't been as welcoming or appreciative of your full capabilities as we might have been. Coming from Richard, this qualified acknowledgement was unprecedented. Daniel looked as shocked as I felt. That said, Richard continued, I find the idea of tying financial arrangements to personal behavior problematic. It sets a precedent I'm not comfortable with. I considered his perspective seriously. I understand your concern. I'm not attempting to purchase better treatment through financial incentives. I offered favorable terms because you're family and I want what's best for everyone involved. The conversation about respect is separate but related. It's about moving forward together in a healthier way. Patricia spoke up, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. What exactly would respect look like to you, Jennifer? Concrete examples might help us understand. The question was genuine, which made me realize how differently we saw the same interactions. I took a deep breath. It would look like asking my opinion about financial matters that affect the family, not just Daniel's. It would mean not describing my choice to focus on raising our children as giving up my career, but as a deliberate decision we made together. It would be acknowledging that managing our household is actual work, not a permanent vacation from responsibility. I paused, gauging their reactions before continuing. More broadly, it would mean treating me as a peer adult in this family, not as an accessory to your son or a glorified nanny to your grandchildren. Richard's expression was difficult to read. I never thought of our behavior in those terms. I know, I said gently. That's part of the problem. Martin, who had remained silent during this exchange, cleared his throat. If I might offer an observation, what Mrs. Wheeler is describing sounds less like a condition and more like a clarification of expectations going forward. Similar to how we include relationship parameters in business partnerships. Richard considered this framing, clearly more comfortable with a business analogy. So you're suggesting we view this as a family reset with clear expectations that happens to coincide with a financial transaction? Exactly, I agreed, grateful for Martin's intervention. The mortgage sale benefits everyone financially. The discussion about family dynamics benefits everyone emotionally. They're parallel, not conditional. Daniel, who had been quietly supportive throughout, finally spoke. Dad, Mom, Jennifer isn't trying to leverage you. She's trying to create space for herself in our family that honors who she actually is, not just the role she plays. Patricia's eyes glistened suddenly. I never meant to make you feel diminished, Jennifer. I thought I was. Celebrating. The choices you made for family, the same choices I made. The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. I had never considered that Patricia might see my role as an echo of her own life decisions, choices made in an era with far fewer options for women. I know you didn't intend harm, I said carefully, and I value many aspects of the life choices we share. I just need room to be more than only that. Richard stood abruptly and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The three of us waited in tense silence. Finally, he turned. We'll accept your financial terms, he said, and we will endeavor to meet your expectations regarding family interactions. Not as a condition of the arrangement, but because he seemed to struggle with the words. Because you're right. We haven't given you the full respect you deserve. The admission, clearly difficult for him, shifted something fundamental in the room. Patricia wiped a tear. Daniel exhaled audibly. Martin looked relieved that the awkward family dynamics portion of the meeting was concluding. Thank you, I said simply, knowing better than to belabor the moment. Richard nodded briskly, reverting to business mode. Martin will coordinate with your financial advisor on the paperwork. We'd like to move forward with the college funds as soon as the mortgage transfer is complete. As we prepared to leave, Richard surprised me by extending his hand, a gesture he typically reserved for business associates and Daniel's male friends. I respect your financial acumen, Jennifer. That mortgage bundle was a smart investment. The compliment, stilted but sincere, represented a first step. I accepted his handshake with a nod. Thank you, Richard. I look forward to discussing the college investment strategy with you. Patricia walked us to the door, lingering as Daniel went ahead to start the car. This hasn't been easy, she said quietly, for any of us, but perhaps it was necessary. I think it was, I agreed. Sometimes, growth requires discomfort. She considered this. Next Sunday dinner. Will you come? All of you? We'll be there. The mortgage transfer was finalized the following week with minimal complications. True to their word, Richard and Patricia established the college funds immediately after, requesting my input on investment allocations. The financial aspects were, in many ways, the simplest part of our new arrangement. The personal recalibration proved more challenging. Old habits of interaction didn't dissolve overnight. At the first Sunday dinner following our agreement, Richard still directed most financial conversation toward Daniel. Patricia still referred to my pre-motherhood career as when Jennifer used to work, as if raising children and managing a household didn't constitute work. But there were small changes too. Richard asked my opinion about a stock he was considering. Patricia inquired about my investment strategy for the children's education. Daniel made a point of highlighting my contributions to our family's financial planning in ways he hadn't before. Progress came in lurching steps forward and occasional slides backward. At a family birthday celebration, Richard reflexively dismissed my suggestion about his retirement portfolio, then caught himself mid-sentence, and actually considered my input. During a kitchen conversation, Patricia began to introduce me to her friend as Daniel's wife, before amending it to my daughter-in-law Jennifer, who has a background in finance. Most significantly, the experience had transformed my relationship with Daniel. He became more attentive, more aware of the subtle ways our family dynamics had shaped our marriage. We began having weekly discussions about both household and financial matters, reclaiming the partnership that had gradually eroded beneath the weight of gendered expectations. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as we reviewed our investment portfolio together, "about how differently my parents treated Rebecca's career choices versus mine. They pushed her toward teaching or nursing, helping professions, while they encouraged my business ambitions from day one. And they treated her husband Tom differently than they treated me," I added. "His career struggles were temporary setbacks, while my choice to pause my career was giving up." Daniel nodded slowly. "I never noticed the double standard until now. And I'm starting to see how I perpetuated some of those same patterns with you." His awareness itself was healing. Not perfect, not complete, but progress toward the partnership we'd started with years ago. 3 months after the mortgage arrangement, Richard called me directly, not Daniel, with a request that signaled a genuine shift in our relationship. "Jennifer, I'm considering some changes to my investment portfolio before the tax year ends. I'd appreciate your thoughts, given your background." The request came stiffly, formally, but it came nonetheless. "Perhaps we could meet for lunch next week, just the two of us." The lunch was awkward at first, both of us navigating unfamiliar terrain. But as we moved from personal pleasantries to financial discussion, something remarkable happened. Richard actually listened to my analysis, asked substantive questions, engaged with my perspective as a professional rather than dismissing it as amateur input. "You know," he said as we finished our meal, "Daniel mentioned you're helping a friend with her small business investment strategy." "Sarah, yes. She's expanding her boutique and needed some guidance on financing options." He nodded thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered consulting? Not full-time, but selectively. You clearly haven't lost your instincts for this work." The suggestion caught me off guard. "I've thought about it occasionally, but the children are in school most of the day now," he pointed out. "And from what I gather, you're managing your own investments quite successfully already." I studied him, trying to discern his motivation. "This is quite a change from just a housewife." Richard had the grace to look embarrassed. I was wrong to say that, narrow-minded and wrong. The simple admission, without qualifications or excuses, meant more than any financial arrangement we could have made. Spring arrived with a sense of tentative renewal, both in nature and in our family dynamics. The initial shockwaves from my mortgage revelation had settled into something less volatile, but still evolving. A recalibration of relationships that sometimes felt like navigating unfamiliar terrain without a map. Richard's suggestion about consulting work had planted a seed I couldn't ignore. After our lunch, I found myself mentally reviewing my professional network, considering what a partial return to finance might look like while maintaining my priority of being present for Emma and Jack. The idea both exhilarated and terrified me, stepping back into a world I'd left behind, but doing so on my own terms. One Tuesday morning after dropping the children at school, I called Meredith instead of heading straight home to tackle the waiting laundry and meal planning. "Coffee?" I suggested. "I have some ideas I'd like to run by you." She agreed immediately, and an hour later we were settled at a corner table in a cafe downtown, the kind of place I rarely frequented anymore, filled with professionals tapping on laptops or conducting quiet meetings. "So," Meredith stirred her cappuccino, studying me over the rim of her cup. "Richard Wheeler suggested you get back into finance? The same man who dismissed your entire professional identity at Thanksgiving? This I have to hear." I explained our lunch meeting, his unexpected encouragement, and my own conflicted response. I can't decide if it's a genuine evolution in how he sees me or some kind of strange atonement, I admitted. Either way, it's made me realize I miss certain aspects of my work. Not the 60-hour weeks or office politics, but the analytical challenges, the sense of contributing something measurable. Meredith nodded, unsurprised. "I've been waiting for this conversation. You were too good to stay away forever." "I'm not looking to jump back in full-time," I clarified. "The children still need—" "Jennifer," she interrupted gently, "you don't have to justify your parameters to me. There are multiple ways to engage with this industry that aren't all or nothing." She reached into her bag and extracted a slim folder, sliding it across the table. "I've been holding on to this opportunity, waiting for the right moment to mention it." Inside was information about a boutique financial advisory firm specializing in women-owned businesses and female investors. They were seeking part-time consultants, with flexible schedules to work primarily with clients transitioning through major life changes: divorce, widowhood, inheritance, career shifts. Leslie Chen runs it. You remember her from the Montgomery acquisition. She specifically asked if you might be interested. No pressure, just exploratory conversations at this point. I stared at the materials, a complex mixture of emotions bubbling up. "Why didn't you mention this sooner?" Meredith's expression softened. "Because you weren't ready. You needed to come to this realization yourself, not have it suggested by someone else, even me." She was right, I realized. Even 6 months ago, I might have dismissed the opportunity as impractical, too disruptive to the careful balance I'd constructed in our household. Daniel's career had always taken precedence, my family obligations positioning me as the flexible, accommodating partner. But something fundamental had shifted since Thanksgiving, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. "I'll call Leslie," I decided, just to explore the possibility. Meredith smiled, satisfied. "That's all I'm suggesting. And Jennifer, whatever you decide, remember that your value isn't determined by whether you're earning a paycheck. You've already proven that in rather spectacular fashion." At home, I found myself standing in my office-turned-storage room, seeing it with fresh eyes. Toys had migrated onto bookshelves once lined with finance textbooks. Craft supplies spilled from bins where I'd once kept organized files. My desk, a beautiful cherrywood piece I'd purchased with my first significant bonus, was barely visible beneath stacks of school newsletters, holiday decorations waiting to be stored, and children's artwork. I began clearing it methodically, not with resentment, but with purpose. This wasn't about erasing my role as mother and household manager, but about creating space for another dimension of myself that had been too long neglected. By the time Emma and Jack burst through the door from school, I had uncovered my desk, organized my books, and created a dedicated work area. They noticed immediately, pausing in the doorway with identical expressions of curiosity. "Are you making an art room, Mom?" Jack asked, eyeing the newly visible space. "Not exactly," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I'm setting up a place where I can do some work like I used to before you were born." Emma's forehead creased. "You're going back to work? Like leaving every day?" I sat on the edge of the desk, beckoning them closer. "No, sweetheart. I'm exploring some options to do work from home, just a few hours while you're at school. Nothing. That would change our routine together. She seemed to consider this seriously. Is this because of what Grandpa said at Thanksgiving? About you being just a housewife? The question caught me off guard. I'd underestimated how much our children absorbed of adult tensions, even when we thought we were shielding them. Partly, I admitted, seeing no value in dishonesty. But mostly because I'm remembering parts of myself that I've set aside for a while. You know how you love both soccer and piano and wouldn't want to be told you could only do one forever? Emma nodded solemnly. Well, I love being your mom more than anything, but I also love solving financial puzzles and helping people with money questions. I think I can do both, just in different amounts than before. Will Dad be mad? Jack asked quietly, the question revealing another layer of tension he'd sensed. No, honey. Dad and I have talked about this. He supports me exploring new opportunities, just like I've always supported his work. That evening, I shared my conversation with Meredith and the children's reactions with Daniel. He listened thoughtfully as we prepared dinner together, a routine we'd established more intentionally in recent months. I think it's a good idea, he said finally, dicing vegetables with the precision he brought to everything. But are you sure about the timing? With everything still settling from the situation with my parents? I appreciated that he didn't dismiss the idea outright, but the hesitation was telling. I'm not rushing into anything, just exploring possibilities, starting with a conversation with Leslie Chen. He nodded, but something in his expression remained guarded. It's just, you know how my father can be. If he thinks this was his idea that you're acting on, it might reinforce his sense of influence. The observation was astute and slightly uncomfortable. Was I allowing Richard's suggestion to carry more weight than it should, simply because it represented a form of professional validation I'd been denied from that quarter for so long? This isn't about your father, I said carefully. It's about me recognizing an opportunity that aligns with my current priorities and capabilities. The timing is coincidental. Daniel accepted this with a nod, and we moved on to other topics. Jack's science project, Emma's upcoming recital, weekend plans. But the conversation lingered in my mind, raising questions about motivation and independence that needed further reflection. The call with Leslie Chen the following day clarified many of these questions. She remembered me from our limited professional interactions years earlier and spoke candidly about her firm's approach. We're deliberately structured to accommodate consultants with significant family responsibilities, she explained. Many of our team members are women returning to finance after career pauses, or those seeking more flexibility than traditional firms offer. The model was innovative. Consultants could take on as few or as many clients as their schedules permitted, with a minimum commitment of 10 hours weekly. Work could be conducted remotely with occasional in-person client meetings, scheduled around personal obligations. We're particularly interested in your background with high net worth individual investors, Leslie continued. Combined with your perspective as someone who's navigated major life transitions yourself, you bring a valuable combination of technical expertise and personal understanding. The reference to my major life transitions was delicate but clear. Leslie was aware of my choice to step back from my career for family and saw it as an asset rather than a liability in working with clients making similar decisions. I'd like to come in and learn more, I told her. No commitments yet, but I'm definitely interested in exploring this further. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, and I hung up feeling a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. This tentative step toward reclaiming my professional identity felt significant, a tangible outcome of the seismic shifts that had occurred in our family dynamics since Thanksgiving. That Sunday brought our regular dinner at Richard and Patricia's home, a tradition that had continued despite the tension, though with subtle changes in tone and interaction. I debated whether to mention the potential consulting opportunity, uncertain how it would be received. Would Richard see it as validation of his suggestion? Would Patricia view it as rejection of the homemaking role she valued so highly? I decided transparency was the best approach. These dinners had been characterized by too many unspoken thoughts already. The announcement came naturally during a lull in conversation as we finished the main course. "I have some news," I said, drawing everyone's attention. "I'm exploring a part-time consulting opportunity with a financial advisory firm specializing in women clients. It would be very flexible, built around the children's schedules." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Leslie Chen's firm? I've heard good things about their model." The fact that he'd researched the firm following our lunch conversation spoke volumes about his evolving perspective, or at least his effort to demonstrate change. "Yes, actually. I'm meeting with her next week to discuss possibilities." "That sounds perfect for you," Patricia said, her tone genuine if slightly cautious. "You've always been so organized with time management." The compliment, specific and professional rather than vaguely maternal, represented its own small victory. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of solidarity I appreciated. "It's just exploratory at this point," I emphasized. "I'm not rushing into anything." "Smart," Richard nodded. "Assess the opportunity thoroughly before committing. That's always been your strength." The acknowledgement of my professional judgment, without qualification or comparison to Daniel, felt like crossing an invisible threshold. Not dramatic, not complete, but progress nonetheless. After dinner, as Patricia and I cleaned up while the men watched a basketball game with the children, she broached the subject again. "Jennifer, I hope you know I support your interest in returning to work. I know I haven't always appreciated your professional background as I should have." I placed dishes in the dishwasher, considering my response. "Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot." She arranged dessert plates with practiced precision. "You know, I wanted to work after the children were in school. I had a teaching degree gathering dust in a drawer." This was new information. In all our years of family gatherings, Patricia had never mentioned professional aspirations beyond homemaking. "What happened?" I asked carefully. Her smile held a complex mixture of acceptance and regret. It was a different time. Richard's career was taking off, demanding frequent relocations. The children needed stability. Social expectations were less flexible than now. I could hear the unspoken parallels to my own situation, the accommodations made, the identity gradually subsumed by family needs, but also the crucial differences in era and opportunity. "It wasn't all sacrifice," she continued, perhaps reading my thoughts. "I found satisfaction in creating a home, supporting Richard's career, raising Rebecca and Daniel. But sometimes I wonder about that alternate Patricia, the one who taught high school English into her 60s. The vulnerability of her confession created a new bridge between us, not erasing past tensions, but contextualizing them differently. It's never too late, you know," I offered gently, "to explore interests beyond family roles." Patricia laughed softly. "At 70? Perhaps not teaching, but there's a literacy program at the community center always looking for volunteers. I've thought about it." "You'd be wonderful at that." She handed me a serving platter to dry. "My point is, don't wait decades to reclaim parts of yourself that matter. I'm glad you're exploring this opportunity." The conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with Patricia, a shift from the polite distance we'd maintained to something approaching genuine understanding. My meeting with Leslie the following week exceeded expectations. The firm's offices were nothing like the imposing financial institutions where I'd previously worked. A converted Victorian house with comfortable meeting spaces, modern technology, seamlessly integrated into the historical architecture. A small garden where clients could sit during pleasant weather. Leslie introduced me to several team members, women of varying ages and backgrounds who had found their way to this unique practice through different paths. Some had never left finance but had sought more balanced environments. Others had taken extended career breaks before returning. A few had come from entirely different industries, bringing fresh perspectives to financial advising. We don't see the traditional career trajectory as the only valid one, Leslie explained as she showed me a potential office space I could use when needed. The insights gained from managing households, raising children, volunteering, or pursuing other interests make our advisors more empathetic and effective with clients. The validation of my non-traditional path was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Here, my years focused on family weren't viewed as a resume gap to be explained away, but as valuable experience that enhanced my professional capabilities. At the end of our meeting, Leslie made a formal offer: a 6-month trial period working with 3 clients, with the possibility of expansion based on mutual satisfaction. The hours were flexible, the compensation fair, and the opportunity to rebuild my professional identity without sacrificing family priorities felt like exactly what I needed. "I'd like to accept," I told her, "but I need to discuss the specifics with my family first." She nodded approvingly. "Take the time you need. That kind of deliberate decision-making is exactly what we value here." The drive home was filled with a buzzing excitement I hadn't felt in years. I allowed myself to imagine new business cards, with my name and credentials, client meetings where my expertise was sought and valued, a professional wardrobe updated for this new chapter. But beneath the excitement lay practical considerations: childcare for occasional after-school client meetings, household responsibilities that would need redistribution, the energy required to step back into professional engagement after years away. Daniel's reaction when I shared the offer that evening was supportive but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Pride mixed with apprehension, perhaps. "It sounds perfect for you," he said as we sat on the back porch after the children were in bed. "The flexibility, the focus on women clients, the validation of different career paths. I'm happy for you, Jen." "But," I prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation. He sighed, swirling the wine in his glass. "No, but exactly. Just awareness that this changes things, for all of us. Good changes, necessary ones even, but changes nonetheless." "I've thought about the logistics," I assured. My hours would primarily be during school days. For occasional after-school meetings, we could use the same sitter who covers your business trips. The household." "It's not just logistics," he interrupted gently. "It's recalibration. For 7 years, we've operated with certain assumptions about our roles. I've relied on your flexibility, your availability. That's going to shift." The admission was honest and slightly uncomfortable for both of us, a recognition of the unbalanced distribution of family responsibilities that had developed over time. "You're right," I acknowledged, "and that shift is overdue. Not just because of this opportunity, but because our current arrangement places disproportionate weight on my shoulders while limiting my options." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know, I've benefited from that imbalance without fully recognizing it. That needs to change regardless of your decision about this job." His self-awareness was a gift, the difference between grudging accommodation and genuine partnership in this transition. So we'll figure it out together," I said, reaching for his hand. "Day by day, adjustment by adjustment. Not perfect, but progress." The following weeks brought a cascade of practical changes as I prepared to step back into professional life. My home office completed its transformation from storage room to functional workspace. My wardrobe expanded beyond the comfortable but casual clothes that had become my daily uniform. A detailed family calendar took prominence on the refrigerator, coordinating everyone's schedules with new precision. More significant than these tangible changes were the shifts in family dynamics. Daniel began taking more active responsibility for school communications and children's appointments. Emma and Jack adjusted to occasionally having their father pick them up from activities. Richard and Patricia offered to cover after-school care one day weekly, a gesture that surprised and touched me. "We want to support this new chapter," Patricia explained when she proposed the arrangement. "And selfishly, more time with the grandchildren is never unwelcome." My first day as a consultant arrived with less fanfare than I'd anticipated. No dramatic office entrance or team welcome. Just a quiet morning at my home desk reviewing client files Leslie had shared, preparing for my first meeting later that week. Yet the ordinary nature of the transition felt right somehow, a natural evolution rather than a radical reinvention. The initial clients assigned to me represented exactly the demographic Leslie had described: women navigating significant financial transitions with limited confidence in their decision-making capabilities. My first in-person meeting was with Eleanor, a recently widowed woman in her 60s who had never managed investments during her 40-year marriage. "My husband handled everything financial," she explained, hands fidgeting nervously with her wedding ring. "The advisors at his bank keep talking about asset allocation and risk tolerance, but it might as well be a foreign language. My children mean well, but they're either too busy or too eager to tell me what to do rather than help me understand." I recognized in Eleanor's situation echoes of the dynamic I'd worked to change in my own life. The outsourcing of financial agency, the acceptance of others' decisions without full participation or understanding. "Financial concepts can seem intimidating," I acknowledged, "but they're learnable. Like any new skill. Our goal isn't just to manage your assets, but to help you develop confidence in overseeing them yourself." Relief washed over her face. That's exactly what I need. Not just someone to tell me what to do with Harvey's life insurance money, but to help me understand why. The session unfolded naturally, a blend of practical financial assessment and deeper conversation about Eleanor's goals and concerns. By the end, we'd established not just an investment framework, but also an educational plan to build her financial literacy gradually. As she gathered her belongings to leave, Eleanor paused. "You know what the most helpful thing about this meeting was? You didn't talk down to me. The male advisors I've met with, they mean well, but there's always this undercurrent of, 'Don't worry your pretty head about the details, dear.'" Her observation resonated deeply with my own experiences. The subtle dismissal I'd encountered in professional settings, family gatherings, even occasionally in my marriage. The recognition strengthened my conviction that this new role wasn't just about financial advice, but about empowerment. Over the following weeks, I settled into a rhythm that balanced client work, family responsibilities, and self-care more effectively than I'd managed in years. The stimulation of professional engagement energized rather than depleted me, making me more present and patient during family time. Daniel noticed the difference. "You seem lighter somehow," he observed one evening as we prepared dinner. "More yourself." "I feel more integrated," I replied, the word coming to me suddenly. "Less compartmentalized, like I'm using more of my capabilities across all areas of my life." He nodded thoughtfully. "I see it in how you engage with the kids too, especially Emma. You're modeling something important for her." The observation touched me deeply. Beyond financial security or personal fulfillment, the example I set for our daughter had become increasingly important to me, showing her that motherhood and professional identity weren't mutually exclusive, that her value would never be limited to a single role. 1 month into my consulting work, Leslie invited me to join a client meeting that unexpectedly expanded my professional trajectory. The potential client was Sophia Martinez, a successful entrepreneur who had recently sold her tech company and was seeking comprehensive wealth management. "I'd like you to sit in because Sophia specifically requested an advisor who understands family dynamics," Leslie explained. "Your background makes you well suited to her situation." The meeting revealed why my perspective was valuable. Sophia had built her company while raising 3 children as a single mother, making significant sacrifices along the way. Now, with substantial wealth at her disposal, she struggled with everything from investment strategies to family expectations. "Everyone has an opinion about what I should do with the money," she explained, frustration evident. "My siblings think I should fund their business ventures. My oldest is pressuring me to pay for an extravagant wedding. Financial advisors push complex tax strategies without explaining them clearly. It sounds like you need not just investment management, but a framework for decision-making that honors your values," I observed. Sophia's eyes locked with mine. "Exactly. I didn't work 80-hour weeks for a decade to have others dictate how the rewards are allocated." After the meeting, Leslie pulled me aside. "Sophia wants you as her primary advisor. She connected with your approach." I hesitated. "She's a much higher net worth client than my current caseload. Are you sure I'm ready?" "Absolutely," Leslie affirmed. "Your technical skills are solid, and more importantly, you understand the human element of her situation. That combination is rarer than you might think in this industry." Taking on Sophia's account marked a significant step in my professional reemergence, a vote of confidence in capabilities I'd sometimes doubted during my years away from finance. It also represented increased responsibility and visibility within the firm. That evening, I shared the development with Daniel during our now regular evening walk, a habit we'd established to carve out adult conversation time amid busy family schedules. "That's impressive," he said genuinely. "Taking on a major client so quickly." "It's exciting but intimidating," I admitted. "Higher stakes, more complex portfolio, greater expectations. You'll exceed them," Daniel said with certainty. "You always do when you're passionate about something." His unwavering support contrasted sharply with the earliest days of my return to work, when concerns about logistics and role adjustments had dominated our conversations. The shift reflected our mutual adaptation to this new chapter. Daniel growing into a more equitable partnership, me balancing professional ambition with family priorities more confidently. 2 months into my consulting role, an unexpected invitation arrived from Richard's executive assistant, a request to join him for lunch at his club, a venue typically reserved for his business associates and male family members. Daniel had been invited there countless times. I never had. "Should I go?" I asked Daniel that evening. "It feels significant, but also potentially awkward." "Definitely go," he encouraged. "Dad doesn't make these gestures lightly. Whatever he wants to discuss, it's important to him." The club was exactly as I'd imagined from Daniel's descriptions. Wood-paneled walls adorned with portraits of founding members, leather chairs worn to perfect comfort, discreet staff anticipating needs before they were voiced. I felt conspicuous as the hostess led me to Richard's regular table, aware of being one of few women in the main dining room. Richard stood as I approached, a formal courtesy he'd rarely extended at family gatherings. "Jennifer, thank you for coming. I hope the timing didn't disrupt your work schedule." The acknowledgement of my professional commitments, casual but deliberate, set the tone for our meeting. This wasn't just a family lunch. It was a recognition of my reclaimed identity. After ordering, Richard came directly to the point with characteristic efficiency. "I have a proposition I'd like you to consider. My company's retirement plan needs restructuring, better investment options, more education for employees, lower fees. Our current provider is adequate, but uninspired." I nodded, uncertain where this was heading. "Leslie Chen's firm has an exceptional corporate division," he continued. "I'm considering moving our account there, but I wanted to discuss it with you first, given your connection." The implication was clear and somewhat startling. Richard was considering directing significant business to my new employer, a gesture that could substantially enhance my standing there. "That's a major decision," I said carefully. "What prompted your interest in changing providers?" "Multiple factors," Richard replied. "But primarily, Your situation made me realize how poorly we've addressed the needs of employees navigating career transitions, particularly women returning to work after family leave, or those approaching retirement, with inadequate preparation. The admission that my experience had influenced his business thinking was unprecedented. Richard had always maintained rigid separation between family matters and corporate decisions. Leslie's firm does excellent work in that area, I acknowledged. But I want to be clear that you shouldn't direct business there because of my connection. It should be a sound business decision based on their merits. Richard's expression shifted to something resembling respect. I expected nothing less from you, Jennifer. Rest assured, we've done thorough due diligence. Their approach aligns. With changes I've been considering for some time, your presence there simply brought them to my attention sooner. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing the technical aspects of retirement plan management, fees, investment options, participant, education. Richard listened attentively to my perspectives, asking substantive questions that engaged my expertise rather than testing it. We disagreed on several points, debating them as equals rather than as in-laws with a complicated history. As we prepared to leave, Richard made one final comment that lingered with me long afterward. I've spent 40 years in business making judgments about people's capabilities, he said quietly. I was wrong about yours, and I regret the opportunities that misjudgment may have cost both of us over the years. The acknowledgement wasn't elaborate or emotional. That wasn't Richard's way. But in its simplicity lay a profound recognition of past errors and present change. Not everything was resolved between us. Not every slight acknowledged or pattern corrected. But a door had opened that I'd once thought permanently closed. 3 months into my new role, I found myself in a position I couldn't have imagined at Thanksgiving, managing 7 client relationships, contributing to the firm's approach to women in transition, and navigating a family dynamic transformed by my reclaimed financial identity. The journey hadn't been linear or perfect. There had been difficult conversations, logistical challenges, moments of doubt. But each week brought new evidence that this evolution wasn't just about professional re-emergence or family respect. It was about integration, bringing together aspects of myself that had been artificially separated, allowing each to enrich rather than compete with the others. One evening, helping Emma with a school assignment about career aspirations, I realized how profoundly my perspective had changed. "Mom," she asked thoughtfully, "do you think it's possible to be both important at work and a good parent? My friend Zoe says her mom is always too busy with her job to come to school events." 6 months earlier, I might have offered reassurance that prioritizing family was the most important choice a woman could make. Now, I saw the complexity in her question and the opportunity to offer a more nuanced response. "I think different families find different balances," I told her. "And those balances change over time. When you and Jack were very young, I chose to focus primarily on our family. Now that you're older, I'm able to engage professionally again. But neither choice was about importance. Both are valuable parts of who I am." Emma considered this. "Seriously? So it's not about choosing between being a mom and having a career. It's about when and how you do both." "Exactly," I confirmed, touched by her insight. "And whatever choices you make someday will be valid if they reflect your priorities and values, not someone else's expectations." As she returned to her assignment, I recognized in her question the seeds of a more expansive understanding than I'd grown up with. One that viewed women's identities as multifaceted rather than role-restricted. That evolution across generations felt like the most meaningful outcome of my own journey from just a housewife to a woman reclaiming her whole self on her own terms. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, I stood at the podium of a downtown hotel conference room, looking out at 200 faces, mostly women, though a notable number of men scattered throughout the audience. The quarterly client education event had begun as Leslie's idea, but I had embraced it enthusiastically. developing a presentation on financial independence through life transitions that drew heavily on both my professional knowledge and personal experience. Financial empowerment isn't just about understanding investment strategies or tax laws, I concluded, meeting the gaze of attendees who nodded in recognition. It's about claiming your seat at the table where decisions are made, whether that table is in a corporate boardroom or your family dining room. The applause was gratifying, but more meaningful were the women who approached afterward, sharing stories that echoed fragments of my own. The executive who deferred to her husband on investment decisions despite managing million-dollar budgets at work. The recent divorcee discovering financial documents she'd signed without fully understanding. The widow rebuilding confidence after decades of delegating money matters. Leslie appeared at my elbow as the last attendee departed, her expression satisfied. "That was exceptional, Jennifer. You found your voice in this work." "It feels natural," I admitted. "Like I've been preparing for it without realizing." "Because you have been. Your personal journey gives you credibility that can't be manufactured." She checked her watch. "We should head upstairs. The board is eager to hear your proposal." The elevator ride to the top floor executive suite gave me a moment to collect my thoughts. 6 months into my role, what had begun as part-time consulting had evolved into something more substantial. My client base had expanded beyond recently divorced or widowed women to include female executives and business owners seeking comprehensive financial planning. Eleanor, my first client, had referred 3 friends. Sophia Martinez had introduced me to her network of women entrepreneurs. Most significantly, I'd identified a gap in the firm's service model, a structured program for couples navigating financial power dynamics, helping them establish more equitable approaches to money management before crisis points like divorce or death force the issue. The board meeting represented a pivotal moment, an opportunity to formalize this new direction and expand my role from consultant to program director. It also meant committing to increased hours and visibility, a decision that had prompted thorough family discussions. "Nervous?" Leslie asked as the elevator doors opened. "Prepared," I corrected with a confidence that still occasionally surprised me. This program matters, not just for the firm, but for the clients who need it. The boardroom embodied subtle but meaningful differences from traditional financial firms I'd worked with previously. The imposing mahogany table remained, but surrounding it were ergonomic chairs selected for comfort during lengthy discussions rather than imposing aesthetics. The walls displayed abstract art by female artists rather than the traditional hunting scenes or naval paintings that dominated most financial institutions. Most notably, the board itself was gender-balanced, 4 men and 4 women with diverse professional backgrounds. I presented my proposal methodically, market analysis demonstrating the need for couples financial counseling with an emphasis on equitable decision-making, curriculum outline for a 6-session program, projected staffing, requirements and revenue potential. The board's questions were incisive but constructive, exploring implications and applications rather than searching for weaknesses. "The concept is sound," said Marcus Green, the most traditionally minded of the directors. "But I'm concerned about scalability. Can you maintain the personal connection that makes your individual advising so effective when working with couples, particularly couples in potential conflict?" The question was legitimate and one I'd anticipated. The program isn't designed to replace individual advising, but to complement it. Each couple would have primary relationship managers for their specific investments, with the program providing specialized guidance on decision-making frameworks and communication strategies for financial matters. Marcus nodded, seemingly satisfied. Elizabeth Chen, Leslie's mother and the firm's founder, leaned forward with the final and most crucial question. "You've identified a genuine need, Jennifer, and proposed a thoughtful approach to addressing it, but I'd like to understand your personal stake in this initiative. Why does this particular program matter to you?" The question invited precisely the kind of authentic response that differentiated this firm from others I'd encountered. I considered how much personal disclosure was appropriate in this professional context, then opted for honesty within boundaries. My interest stems from personal experience and professional observation. I've navigated significant shifts in financial power dynamics within my own marriage. First, when I stepped back from my career to focus on our children, and again when I returned to professional work. I've witnessed how easily financial decision-making can become imbalanced, even in otherwise equitable relationships. I paused, gauging their reactions before continuing. More broadly, I've seen how financial dependence creates vulnerability, particularly for women who've prioritized family care over career advancement. This program offers preventative intervention, helping couples establish healthy financial partnerships before crisis points force change. Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied. Thank you for that context. It aligns with our founding mission, not just managing money, but transforming relationships with it. The board's deliberation was brief and decisive. My proposal was approved, with implementation to begin the following quarter. Additionally, I was offered a promotion to senior advisor and program director with commensurate increase in compensation and responsibility. As Leslie and I debriefed afterward in her office, the magnitude of the shift in my professional trajectory over the past year struck me forcefully. From just a housewife to program director at a respected financial firm in 12 months, a transformation that felt both sudden and long overdue. You should be proud, Leslie commented, correctly reading my expression. This isn't just professional advancement, it's purpose alignment. You've found the intersection of your skills and the world's needs. It's still evolving, I acknowledged. Balancing increased responsibility here with family priorities remains a work in progress. That balance is never perfect or permanent, she observed. The point isn't finding some mythical equilibrium, but making conscious choices about trade-offs. Speaking of which, are you still planning to attend Emma's science competition this afternoon? I glanced at my watch, gathering my materials. Absolutely. Daniel's meeting me there. We're taking both kids for ice cream after, regardless of the outcome. Leslie smiled approvingly. That's what makes you effective with clients, you know. You're living the integration you advise others to pursue, not without challenges, but with intention. The middle school auditorium buzzed with pre-competition energy when I arrived 30 minutes later, scanning the crowd for my family. Daniel waved from midway up the bleachers, Jack fidgeting beside him as they saved seats near Emma's designated team area. How did it go? Daniel asked as I settled beside them, accepting the program he'd collected. They approved everything. The couples program, the promotion, the additional staff. His smile was genuine, pride evident. Congratulations. That's significant recognition. A year ago, such professional advancement might have prompted subtle tension, unspoken concerns about shifting family dynamics or disrupted routines. Now, Daniel's support came without caveats or anxiety, a reflection of our mutual adaptation to more balanced partnership. Emma's team presents third, he informed me, pointing to the schedule. They're feeling confident, their alternative energy. Proposal tested well in the preliminary rounds. Jack tugged my sleeve impatiently. Mom, did you know Emma's team made a solar panel that works with ultraviolet light, even when it's cloudy? I did know that, I affirmed, ruffling his hair. Emma explained it to us at dinner last week, remember? Though I suspect she appreciates having such an attentive brother to promote her work. The competition unfolded with the nervous energy unique to middle school academic events, students alternating between impressive articulateness and adolescent awkwardness as they presented projects to judges and audience. When Emma's team took the stage, I felt the familiar maternal mixture of pride and anxiety, wanting desperately for her to succeed while knowing failure would provide its own valuable lessons. Her portion of the presentation focused on market, Applications: the potential commercial viability of their modified solar panel design. As she confidently projected financial models and return on investment calculations, I recognized elements of conversations we'd had at home, concepts I'd explained during informal lessons at the kitchen table while preparing dinner or helping with homework. "She sounds like you," Daniel whispered, squeezing my hand. "The way she breaks down complex ideas into accessible explanations." The observation touched me deeply, not just parental pride in seeing one's abilities reflected in a child, but recognition that Emma was absorbing more than just technical knowledge from my renewed professional engagement. She was internalizing approaches to problem-solving, communication styles, confidence in traditionally male-dominated fields like science and finance. Emma's team placed second, a strong showing that qualified them for the regional competition, while providing constructive feedback for improvements. As promised, we celebrated with ice cream afterwards, Emma dissecting the judges' comments, while Jack debated optimal topping combinations with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could bring to such deliberations. "Mom, can I interview you for my career day project?" Emma asked suddenly, pausing between spoonfuls of mint chocolate chip. "We're supposed to talk to someone whose job seems interesting." The casual request carried unexpected emotional weight. A year ago, Emma wouldn't have considered me a candidate for such an assignment. My work had been invisible, crucial to family functioning but unrecognized in the traditional framework of careers her school curriculum acknowledged. "I'd be honored," I told her, managing to keep my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "Though I'm curious why you chose me instead of Dad. His architectural work is pretty fascinating." She shrugged with the magnificent nonchalance of pre-adolescence. "Dad's job is cool, but everyone's already heard about it. Besides, Sophia from your office has that amazing electric car, and you said she might let you drive it someday. Maybe she'd let me sit in it for a picture for my project?" Daniel and I exchanged amused glances over the children's heads. "Ah, now we get to the real motivation," he teased. Our laughter carried us through the remainder of the afternoon, an ordinary family moment that felt extraordinary in context. The four of us sharing celebration and plans, all of our contributions, and achievements equally valued and visible. That evening, after the children were in bed, Daniel and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, a ritual we'd preserved despite increasingly complex schedules. The spring air carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the trellis I'd installed the previous summer, a project that had become a family effort when initial attempts failed spectacularly. "I've been thinking about how much has changed since last Thanksgiving," Daniel reflected, gazing at the garden illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. "Not just your career or my parents' attitudes, but us. How we function as a team." "It hasn't always been smooth," I acknowledged. "There were some rocky weeks when we were figuring out new routines." He chuckled at the understatement. "Remember the great calendar catastrophe? When I scheduled that client dinner the same night as Jack's parent-teacher conference. And the laundry backlog when neither of us remembered to run the washing machine for 5 straight days?" I added, smiling at the memory. "Emma trying to fashion a gym uniform from her pajama pants?" "The adjustment period was messy," Daniel agreed, "but necessary. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing by defaulting to traditional roles, how many opportunities for connection with the kids, how much understanding of what it takes to manage a household." His reflection acknowledged something we'd discovered gradually, that the rebalancing of responsibilities had benefited him as much as it had me, deepening his relationship with our children and enriching his understanding of family dynamics, beyond the provider role he'd primarily occupied. "We're still figuring it out," I pointed out, "especially with this program director position changing my schedule again." "But we're figuring it out together," he emphasized. "That's the difference. Not you accommodating my career by default, or me grudgingly helping out at home. Actual partnership." The assessment was accurate, if still aspirational in some areas. We'd made genuine progress in redistributing household management, childcare coordination, and emotional labor. Daniel had become more attuned to invisible work that had previously fallen automatically to me. I'd become more comfortable delegating without guilt or excessive instruction. Speaking of partnership, Daniel continued, reaching for the bottle, to refill our glasses. I've been considering a professional shift myself. This was unexpected. Daniel had been with the same architectural firm for 12 years, steadily advancing to senior partner with responsibility for their most prestigious commercial projects. What kind of shift? A lateral move, not a complete change. Anderson has been recruiting me to head their sustainable design division. It would mean more flexible hours, less travel, more creative control, and working primarily with clients who prioritize environmental impact alongside aesthetics. The opportunity aligned perfectly with values Daniel had expressed, but rarely been able to prioritize in his current position, where client demands often overwhelmed design ideals. That sounds ideal for you, I observed. What's holding you back from pursuing it? He hesitated, swirling wine thoughtfully. Timing, partly. With your career expansion, it felt like one major change at a time was enough for our family. And, honestly, I wanted to see how your transition played out before initiating my own. The admission was both touching and slightly frustrating, evidence of his supportiveness, but also an unnecessary deferral of his own professional satisfaction. Daniel, my career doesn't need to come at the expense of yours. That's exactly the false dichotomy we've been working to overcome. I know that intellectually, he acknowledged. But there's still that voice suggesting one parent should maintain maximum stability while the other pursues changes. Logically ridiculous, but emotionally persistent. I recognize the pattern he described. The ingrained belief that family, well-being required one partner, traditionally the woman, to subordinate professional ambitions to create space for the other's advancement. We'd made progress disrupting that pattern, but its remnants lingered in subtle ways. If this opportunity aligns better with your values and could potentially improve your work-life balance, that benefits our entire family, I pointed out. The question isn't whether you should pursue it, but how we'll manage the transition together. Daniel nodded, decision crystallizing. I'll schedule a formal interview with Anderson next week. Their offices are actually closer to home, which would reduce my commute significantly. One more benefit for the pro column, I observed. Now, we just need to warn the children that both parents might be in career transition simultaneously. Jack will probably suggest we all become professional ice cream testers instead. Daniel laughed, relaxing into the possibilities this new chapter might hold for all of us. As our conversation drifted to other topics, summer vacation plans, Emma's upcoming birthday, a documentary series we'd been watching together, I reflected on how our marriage had evolved through the aftermath of my financial revelation. The mortgage that had sparked such upheaval was now almost incidental to the transformations it had catalyzed. The document transferring ownership to Richard and Patricia sat in our safe alongside other important papers, occasionally referenced, for tax purposes but no longer carrying emotional charge. What remained was the fundamental shift in perception within our marriage, our extended family, and most significantly, within myself. Sunday dinners at Richard and Patricia's continued as tradition, though with subtle but meaningful evolutions, in dynamics. My financial insights were now regularly solicited during conversations that once would have excluded me. Patricia had indeed begun volunteering with the literacy program at her community center, occasionally sharing stories of students achieving educational milestones that clearly moved her. Most notably, Richard had developed a genuine interest in my work with couples facing financial transitions, occasionally offering insights from his decades of observations in business settings. During one such conversation, he'd surprised everyone present with an unusual moment of vulnerability. "You know," he'd commented, studying his after-dinner scotch thoughtfully, If a program like yours had existed 40 years ago, Patricia and I might have navigated certain chapters very differently. The oblique reference to their early marriage, when his career ascendancy had coincided with the quiet shelving of her professional aspirations, wasn't elaborated upon, but the acknowledgement itself represented remarkable evolution in his thinking. 2 weeks after my promotion and Daniel's decision to pursue the position at Anderson, Richard and Patricia invited us to dinner on an unusual night, Wednesday rather than Sunday, requesting we arrange childcare rather than bringing Emma and Jack as usual. "Do you think something's wrong?" Daniel asked as we drove to Westview Heights. "Dad being mysterious about the purpose isn't like him." Patricia seemed cheerful when she called, I observed. Not the tone she'd use if there were health concerns or other problems. The mystery deepened when we arrived to find Richard's driveway occupied not only by their cars, but by Rebecca and Tom's SUV as well. A family gathering without the grandchildren was unprecedented. Inside, the dining room was formally set with Patricia's best china and silver. Flowers arranged in the crystal vase reserved for significant occasions. Rebecca and Tom were already seated with drinks, their expressions suggesting they were equally puzzled by the unexpected family summit. "Good, everyone's here," Richard announced, emerging from the kitchen with uncharacteristic domesticity, actually wearing an apron over his dress shirt. "Dinner's almost ready." "Dad's cooking?" Daniel whispered incredulously as we took our seats. "Mom's supervising," Rebecca clarified under her breath. "But apparently he insisted on preparing most of it himself. We're as confused as you are." Patricia appeared with a bottle of champagne, another departure from their usual wine selection. "Richard, shall we tell them before or during dinner?" "Before, I think," he decided, returning to untie his apron before joining us at the table. "No point keeping them in suspense." He cleared his throat with the formal demeanor that typically preceded business announcements. "Patricia and I have made some decisions we wanted to share with you all together. After considerable reflection, I've decided to retire at the end of this quarter." The statement landed like a bombshell. Richard's identity had been so thoroughly intertwined with his company that none of us had imagined voluntary retirement, despite his being well past the age when many executives stepped down. "That's significant," Daniel managed, clearly processing the implications. "Are you sure you're ready?" Richard nodded with unexpected serenity. "More than ready. The company is in excellent hands with my executive team. The succession plan has been in place for years. I've just been reluctant to implement it." "What changed your mind?" Rebecca asked the question we were all wondering. Richard glanced at Patricia, something meaningful passing between them. "Several factors, but primarily, recent events have prompted me to reconsider what I want from this chapter of life." Though he didn't look directly at me, the reference to recent events clearly encompassed the mortgage situation and its aftermath. The revelation that had begun as confrontation had evidently catalyzed deeper reassessment. "There's more," Patricia added, her expression both nervous and excited. "We're also selling this house." This second announcement proved even more shocking than the first. The Westview Heights home had been their residence for 28 years, the place where Daniel and Rebecca had spent their teenage years, where all family gatherings occurred, where traditions and memories were rooted. "Selling," Rebecca echoed, distress evident. "But why? Where would you go?" "We've purchased a villa in a small coastal town in southern Spain," Richard explained calmly. "A place called Nerja, about an hour from Malaga. Beautiful views of the Mediterranean, vibrant expat community, excellent healthcare." The detailed response suggested this wasn't an impulsive decision, but one carefully researched and considered. Still, the dramatic change in trajectory left us all momentarily speechless. "Spain?" Daniel finally managed. "That's quite a distance." "It is," Patricia acknowledged, But with video calls and regular visits, we'll stay connected. And we're hoping you'll all come for extended stays. There's plenty of room for everyone, including the grandchildren. As the initial shock subsided, curiosity emerged. What prompted Spain specifically? I asked. Have you spent time there before? Patricia exchanged another glance with Richard before responding. I studied Spanish literature in college, before I met your father. I spent a semester in Madrid and always dreamed of returning someday. It was a possibility we discussed early in our marriage, but my career took precedence. Richard completed the thought matter-of-factly. Along with children, community obligations, all the priorities that seemed most important at the time. The acknowledgement of paths not taken, of Patricia's deferred dreams, carried no defensiveness or regret, just straightforward recognition. Something in his demeanor suggested this decision represented not capitulation, but restitution, an attempt to honor aspirations long subordinated to his own. We've rented a place for 6 weeks this summer as a trial run, Patricia continued, her excitement increasingly evident. To make sure it's truly what we want before finalizing the permanent move. You're all invited to visit for part of that time. We so hope you will. The conversation flowed more naturally after these revelations, details emerging about retirement timelines, property logistics, Spanish language classes they'd already begun together. Richard had researched potential consulting opportunities with European firms to maintain some professional engagement without full-time commitment. Patricia had connected with women's education initiatives in the region, aligning with her renewed interest in literacy work. As we enjoyed the meal, Richard had indeed prepared largely himself, a Spanish-inspired menu he'd apparently been practicing for weeks. I observed subtle but significant shifts in their interaction. Patricia spoke more assertively about their plans. Richard listened more attentively to her perspectives. The partnership I glimpsed seemed more balanced than any previous iteration of their relationship I'd witnessed. Later, as Patricia gave Rebecca and me a virtual tour of their prospective Spanish home on her tablet, Richard drew Daniel and Tom into conversation about financial considerations for international living. I caught fragments about tax implications and healthcare coverage, noting Richard's unusual inclusion of Tom, whose financial acumen he'd often subtly dismissed, in the discussion. When the evening concluded and goodbyes were exchanged, Patricia hugged me with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. "Thank you," she whispered simply. "For what?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. She pulled back, meeting my eyes directly. "For disrupting patterns we'd lived with so long we stopped seeing them. Richard would never have considered this change without the recalibration your actions prompted." The acknowledgement was unexpected and deeply moving. Recognition that my moment of assertiveness, however uncomfortable at the time, had catalyzed positive change beyond my marriage and immediate family. In the car heading home, Daniel processed his parents' announcements with mixture of concern and admiration. "I can't believe Dad's actually retiring. And Spain? It's like they've been replaced by adventurous doppelgangers. I think they're finally prioritizing what they both want, not just what your father wants or what's expected of them," I observed. "It's actually rather brave at their age." Daniel nodded slowly. "You know what's striking me? Mom seemed more animated tonight than I've seen her in years, like she's finally speaking in her own voice, not just echoing Dad's preferences." "I noticed that too," I agreed. "There's a lesson there about the price of perpetual accommodation. How slowly, but steadily it can diminish someone's sense of agency." We drove in thoughtful silence for several minutes before Daniel spoke again. "You know, their announcement makes my potential job change seem almost conservative by comparison. If my 72-year-old father can reinvent himself in retirement, surely I can shift to a more fulfilling role in the same profession." The observation captured something important about the ripple effects of change across family systems, how one person's transformation could expand the sense of possibility for others, creating permission for growth previously considered unlikely or unavailable. "I think that's exactly right," I affirmed. "And maybe that's the most valuable outcome of everything that's happened this past year. Not just individual changes in circumstance, but a collective expansion of what seems possible for each of us." The following weeks brought rapid developments on multiple fronts. Daniel interviewed with Anderson Architects and received a formal offer with terms even more favorable than initially discussed. My couple's financial program launched with stronger than projected enrollment, necessitating additional sessions to accommodate demand. Richard accelerated his retirement timeline, announcing his departure to his company 3 months earlier than originally planned. Amid these professional shifts, family life continued with its blend of routine demands and unexpected moments. Jack lost his first tooth and conducted elaborate negotiations with the tooth fairy regarding appropriate compensation. Emma's science team advanced to state finals with their improved solar panel design. Daniel and I celebrated our anniversary with a weekend getaway, our first in years without constant text check-ins with children or work. 6 months after Richard and Patricia's announcement, we found ourselves at the airport seeing them off for their extended Spanish trial run, a farewell gathering that balanced excitement for their adventure with recognition of the significant transition it represented for our family rhythm. "You'll video call at least weekly," Rebecca reminded them, her tone belying anxiety about this unprecedented distance from their parents. "And remember the time difference when you're trying to reach us. We've programmed multiple time zones into our phones," Patricia assured her, displaying a newfound comfort with technology she'd previously delegated to others. "And we've arranged international phone plans for emergencies." Richard, uncharacteristically relaxed in casual travel clothes rather than his usual business attire, reviewed last-minute details with Daniel regarding property maintenance and mail forwarding during their absence. I stood slightly apart, watching these interactions with their blend of practical logistics and emotional undercurrents. Patricia approached, drawing me aside for a private moment before their boarding announcement. "I wanted to thank you again, Jennifer. This adventure wouldn't be happening without the catalyst you provided." "You're giving me too much credit," I demurred. "These decisions were yours, and Richard's entirely." She shook her head, gently insistent. "Sometimes people need disruption to see possibilities that were always there, but invisible through habit and expectation. What you did, standing up for your worth, refusing to remain in the box we'd placed you in, it prompted reflection that was long overdue." The acknowledgement was generous, particularly considering the discomfort my revelation had initially caused. "I'm happy if some good came from that difficult moment," I told her sincerely, "and excited for this new chapter you're both embracing." "I never expected to find such freedom at 70, she confessed, a youthful energy animating her expression. "To rediscover dreams I'd set aside decades ago and find them still viable, still meaningful. It's a gift I hadn't anticipated at this stage of life." Their boarding announcement interrupted further conversation, initiating a flurry of hugs, last-minute reminders, and promises to stay connected across the distance. As we watched them disappear through the security checkpoint, Richard's hand resting lightly on Patricia's back, their postures reflecting both excitement and partnership, Daniel squeezed my hand. "Who would have thought a year and a half ago that we'd be here?" he mused. "Watching my parents embark on Spanish retirement adventures while you direct financial programs and I transition to sustainable architecture. Life contains more possibility than we typically acknowledge," I reflected. "Sometimes it takes disruption to reveal those alternatives." The observation applied not just to Richard and Patricia's dramatic life change, but to the more subtle transformations within our nuclear family, the rebalancing of responsibilities, the mutual support for professional growth, the modeling of partnership rather than hierarchy for our children. As we left the airport, Rebecca and Tom departing for their home while we collected Emma and Jack from their friend's house, I reflected on the unexpected journey from that Thanksgiving confrontation to this moment of expanded possibility for all of us. The mortgage that had sparked such upheaval had been transferred, the financial transaction completed months ago. What remained was the profound shift in perception it had catalyzed, the recognition that roles need not be fixed, that power dynamics can be renegotiated, that it's never too late to reclaim aspects of oneself previously diminished or deferred. The most meaningful outcome wasn't the professional advancement or financial arrangements, but the more equitable and authentic relationships emerging from necessary disruption. Relationships in which each person could be seen and valued in their fullness, not reduced to the roles they served for others. In revealing that I owned my in-laws' mortgage that Thanksgiving evening, I'd intended simply to challenge the diminishing label of just a housewife. What I'd actually begun was a process of reclamation, not just of my own identity and agency, but of possibilities for our entire family system that might otherwise have remained unexplored. 2 weeks after Richard and Patricia's departure for Spain, Emma approached me as I prepared dinner, her expression serious in that uniquely preteen way that signaled important conversation ahead. "Mom, can I ask you something about work and family?" I set aside the vegetables I'd been chopping, giving her my full attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" In social studies, we're doing this unit about changing gender roles and stuff, and Mrs. Rodriguez asked us to interview someone about how they balance different parts of their life. She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I thought maybe I could interview you about how you decided to stay home with us and then went back to work, and how you and Dad figure everything out." The request touched me deeply. Recognition that our family's evolution over the past 18 months had provided Emma with a front row seat to exactly the societal shifts her class was examining. "I'd be honored," I told her. "Though I should be clear that we're still figuring it out, your dad and I. It's not a fixed destination, but an ongoing negotiation." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this framing. "That's actually perfect for my project." Mrs. Rodriguez says the whole point is understanding that these things are always changing, not fixed like they try to show on TV. As we discussed interview logistics and potential questions, I reflected on the gift this assignment represented, an opportunity for Emma to process the changes she'd witnessed in our family structure while developing language for concepts she'd experienced throughout her life. The models Daniel and I provided, both the earlier imbalance and the current efforts toward equity, would inform her expectations and choices in ways we couldn't fully anticipate. Perhaps that was the most meaningful outcome of all, that our children were witnessing the evolution of family roles in real time, absorbing the possibility of change, renegotiation, and growth at any stage of life. 2 days later, camera set. Up in the living room for her recorded interview project, Emma posed her first question with journalistic seriousness. "When you were growing up, what did you think your adult life would look like? And how is your actual life different from what you expected?" The thoughtful inquiry invited deeper reflection than I'd anticipated. As I formulated my response, I recognized how far I'd traveled from both the limitations I'd feared and the expectations I'd internalized, finding instead a path that honored multiple aspects of identity while remaining open to continuous evolution. "That's a fascinating question to start with," I told my daughter, equal parts parent and interview subject in that moment. "Let me think about how to articulate the difference between what I once imagined and what I've actually discovered about building a meaningful life." 5 years to the day after I discovered my family dividing my assets while I lay ill, I stood at the podium accepting Seattle Business Magazine's Lifetime Achievement Award. The irony wasn't lost on me. There had been a time when my lifetime seemed precarious, when my achievements were being dismantled by those closest to me. Now, at 47, I found myself addressing a ballroom filled with the city's business leaders, philanthropists, and changemakers. Resilience isn't about remaining unchanged by difficulty, I told the audience. It's about being transformed by it in ways that create greater purpose and meaning. From my position on stage, I could see the faces of those who had become my true family. Rachel, now Horizon's Chief Operating Officer. Maya, directing the Foundation's nationwide rehabilitation programs. Laura, still my trusted legal advisor and friend. In the middle of the room sat Tara Mitchell, that first Foundation recipient who had gone on to become our patient advocacy director, alongside the families we had supported through illness and recovery. And there, at a table near the back, sat Daniel. We had maintained our careful, bounded relationship in the years since the Portland project's completion. Monthly coffee meetings, occasional collaboration on community initiatives, a slow rebuilding of something that wasn't quite familial intimacy, but was more than mere professional acquaintance. He had brought his new wife, Caroline, a psychologist who specialized in addiction recovery, whom he had met in his continuing sobriety journey. Jennifer had not been invited. Our paths had crossed only once in the past 5 years, at Uncle Edward's widow's funeral. The encounter had been civil but distant, the bridge between us too thoroughly burned for reconstruction. She and Gregory had divorced, and she had rebuilt a modest interior design practice in Phoenix. The Christmas cards still arrived each year, but they remained in that drawer, acknowledged but unanswered. The greatest challenge in business and in life, I continued in my speech, isn't achieving success. It's defining what success actually means. The Portland housing development, now known as Restoration Commons, had won national recognition for its innovative design and community impact. Dozens of families with mobility challenges had found not just accessible housing, but genuine community there. The project had become a model, replicated in 3 other cities, each implementation refined based on resident feedback and evolving best practices. For Horizon Properties, the partnership had opened new avenues of development, focused on integrated accessibility and community services. Our properties now routinely incorporated rehabilitation facilities, adaptive technology showcases, and universal design principles. What had begun as a personal response to my own experience had transformed into a corporate mission that differentiated us in the marketplace while creating genuine social impact. The Second Chance Foundation had grown beyond my initial vision, now operating in 7 states with programs addressing the full spectrum of needs facing those with autoimmune and neurological conditions, from immediate medical support to long-term and rehabilitation, from family counseling to workplace accommodation advocacy. The mentorship program paired newly diagnosed patients with those further along in recovery, creating networks of understanding and practical support that the medical system alone couldn't provide. As I concluded my remarks and returned to my seat amid applause, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because the work was finished, it would continue evolving long after this moment, but because the journey from that wheelchair in my lake house to this podium represented a cycle of destruction and creation, of betrayal and renewal, that had ultimately led to something more meaningful than what came before. Later, at the reception following the awards ceremony, Daniel approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Congratulations," he said, handing me one. "It was well-deserved." "Thank you." I accepted both the drink and the sentiment, noting how comfortable these exchanges had become over time, not erasing the past, but not defined by it either. "I wanted to let you know," he said after a moment, "Caroline and I are expecting a girl due in August." The news caught me by surprise, not just the pregnancy, but Daniel's decision to share it with me, to include me in this personal milestone. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Congratulations to you both." He hesitated, then added quietly, "We were thinking of naming her Elizabeth after Mom, but I wanted to check with you first." The consideration in this gesture, This acknowledgement of our shared history and his awareness of how family remembrances might affect me spoke volumes about how far we had come. "I think Mom would have loved that," I replied, finding the words came easier than expected. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "The Portland team mentioned you're consulting on the Denver project. I'll be there next month for the planning sessions." "Yes, I'm scheduled to review the community space designs." "Perhaps we could have dinner while we're both there," he suggested. "Caroline would like to meet you properly, outside of events like this." I considered the invitation, another small extension beyond our carefully maintained boundaries. "I'd like that," I said finally. As Daniel moved away to greet other attendees, I found myself reflecting on the long, complicated journey that had led to this moment. The family that had betrayed me during my illness had irreparably fractured, the trust destroyed beyond full restoration. But from those broken pieces, something new had emerged, not a replica of what was lost, but a mosaic created from fragments of the past, combined with new elements formed in the aftermath. The secret will I had created during my illness had protected my assets, but the true legacy of that difficult time was something more valuable. The clarity to distinguish between genuine connection and mere obligation, the wisdom to build boundaries that protected without isolating, the courage to allow for transformation in others as well as myself. As I moved through the reception, accepting congratulations and discussing future projects, I carried with me the knowledge that true resilience isn't about withstanding change. It's about being changed in ways that reveal our deepest strengths and most authentic purpose. My family had tried to divide my assets when I was at my most vulnerable, never realizing that in doing so, they would ultimately help me discover my most valuable possession, the capacity to transform betrayal into blessing, limitation into purpose, ending into beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.